But you know, the idea is that when you are trying to help young people explore who they are, explore their horizons, and see that those horizons may go much further out than they thought, it's important for teachers to continue to push and to just see where those bounds are. Now, as far as a club being able to show a Will and Grace marathon, I think that since it was on television and it wasn't on cable, it was on normal, regular television, depending on how it's presented to the administration, you might not find that there would be much of a hassle at all. If they've already dealt with the phone calls that came in at the beginning of the year when the club was first organized, and they've managed to survive that, then chances are they're going to figure, oh, you're going to let me off with just Will and Grace, I'm probably okay. We had discussed earlier the possibility of them showing the movie Milk. And I immediately said, is that rated R? Because it's the R rating that would get you perhaps in more trouble than showing the series.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this one?
I was realizing that in our public schools here, anything can be controversial. I mean, even a videotape message from the President of the United States generates phone calls. So I can't imagine Will and Grace not getting a flood.
So, some observations about how the terrain shifts when you move from HP to schools. We have so much anxiety about children and sexuality in this country. Oh. It's sort of beyond any ability. You can't exaggerate, right? So now that I realize that you can't show Will and Grace in, well, I don't know sort of where it's being shown in the hypo, right? But that you're not allowed to teach homosexuality in Utah schools. You're not allowed to teach contraception in Utah schools.
Everything shows Sex and the City.
Sex and the City, I would think, would be way out of bounds. That's cable, right? And I don't mean to mock it at all. When you move from work to school, and then you move from school to like adoption and marriage, what's happening is you're talking more about children, and therefore children's sexual development. And the idea is, part of the anxiety is that the development hasn't happened yet. It's in process, and it's unclear how it's going to turn out. And if you just actually think about what makes something R, you can put a lot of violence in a film and it's not going to be R. But a little bit of sex and it becomes R. Why? Because we're trying to protect children from sexuality, and there's a fundamental premise here that withholding information is a way to educate. And that's, I mean, obviously it's a debatable premise. And I think to sort of link it back to the earlier conversation, there's this hope, I guess, that even though it's a pluralist society, that we can still protect children from this kind of information. And I think it's like, it may be a pluralist country, but in our school district, it doesn't have to be pluralist, right? We won't expose children to blank usually being sexuality, and therefore they won't know about it, and they'll develop in a certain way. And that's, I actually think that, Reverend Seiter, your idea of what we're trying to do is help children explore who they are. I think there's a lot of people who know that's not what we're trying to do. And that's sort of, that's how the debate goes.
Can you focus though on the objection that it regards a homosexual lifestyle, and if that was the way the patrons and students objected to this fundraiser, would your response be any different?
Yeah, so not much. I mean, I really do, I see it as all of a piece, because there's no sex on Will and Grace. In fact, this phrase homosexual lifestyle is always an interesting one. What does it mean? Does it mean doing the laundry? Because that's what gay people do when their clothes get dirty. And so when you say homosexual lifestyle, what are we referring to here? Because there's no homosexuality on will and grace. There is a homosexual on will and grace. There's one gay person and one straight person. And so, or 2 and 2, depending on which characters you include. And so, but this is very much what's going on in HP, right? That the photo says gay, and gay is a claim to an identity. And what the person suing, the plaintiff, Mr. Peterson, doesn't see the person and the identity, he sees the conduct. And in fact, when we read the hypo, it said he regards homosexual conduct as sinful. And so there's this tension. One of the things that's different about homosexuality is that it's an identity that is in some sense revolves in some curious way around conduct. And that's not something that we say about race or about gender as much, although you can certainly pick that apart. But you can certainly say about religion, right? That's an identity based on a kind of conduct.
Adrienne?
Because you pull out race, it made me instantly think of Prom Night in Mississippi, which was a documentary. I don't know if you're all aware of Prom Night in Mississippi. The actor Morgan Freeman lives in Mississippi, and there was a high school in his town that had never had an integrated prom. In 2008, they had not had an integrated prom. And so he went to the high school administration and offered to pay for the prom, whatever kind of prom the students wanted to have, if the school would support it. The school board was terrified of having an integrated prom. But because it was Morgan Freeman, they tended to be a little bit more flexible because he had a camera crew with him. And so they said they would be willing to talk to their student body and they would take a vote amongst their students to see if their students wanted to have an integrated prom. The result was overwhelmingly that yes, let's have an integrated prom. The problem was not with the students. The problem was with the parents. In fact, to such an extent that many parents organized an all-white prom for their children to go to. Because in the words of one of the students in the documentary, I don't want my kids or my daughter rubbing up against some jungle bunny. Right, now this is 2008, 2009, and that's race, right, which, I can't take off my blackness, it's pretty much there, it's sticking. But there's
you can't hide it.
Right, well, I can't, but my mom can, and people think that she's not. So these identities have so many layers and complexities, but we can't get away from the reality that for some of us, people will look at the identities we have and say, there is something about that can contaminate me, that can make something bad happen to me or to my kids. They did have the prom, it was a success. People were very happy overall, but there were still parents who felt that it was wrong. And because there was a history of segregated proms in that community, they felt that a serious harm had been done by integrating the prom.
And I'll just say one word here, well, maybe more than one word, but just to give you an example of expanding horizons, Adrienne was one of my students.
And she was fantastic then and fantastic now.
In the very back.
Well, what about what's going on with Constance right now?
Yeah.
They had the prom, they canceled the prom because she wanted to go with her lesbian partner, and then they created a new prom. They said she was going to be invited to. The prom that she went to was the fake prom, and the real prom was held in a secret location where she and these other 5 couples were not invited to.
Part of the problem here is the question of who owns public institutions, and particularly who owns the public schools. But when you hear people talk about public schools, they always talk about we. It's always the we. This doesn't reflect our values, or we don't like that sort of thing, or whatever. And of course, it's a